Welcome to the book club where the size is just right, the books aren't too long, and you never need to host. That's our job. We bring best-selling and award-winning writers of every genre to Twin Cities metro area libraries to share their stories, discuss their work, and answer those burning questions you've always wanted to ask your favorite authors. This is a book club where we don't have to argue about what the author meant. They can tell us. The book club that doesn't require a clean house or wine and cheese. And in this book club, if you haven't read the book, it's all right. Although, we hope you'll be inspired to pick it up next time you're in the library. I'm your host, Slade Kemet, and you can consider the book club rewritten because this is Club Book. Club Book is made possible by Minnesota's Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund, MELSA, and Library Strategies, part of the Friends of the St. Paul Public Library. We would also like to thank our partnering bookseller, Red Balloon Bookshop. This podcast features Sujata Massey at Hennepin County Library, Plymouth. Sujata Massey is an undisputed master of both mystery and historical fiction. In the words of fellow mystery heavyweight Janet Evanovich, Massey blasted her way into fiction with The Salaryman's Wife, a cross-cultural mystery of manners with a decidedly sexy edge. Her literary debut won the Agatha Award for Best First Novel in 1997 and introduced a legion of readers to the first of her two indomitable heroines. Japanese-American 20-something Rei Shimura is an English teacher and antiques dealer by day, and an amateur sleuth by night. Her unique background provides valuable linguistic and cultural insights which allow her to find clues and crack cases that stump Japanese authorities. Shimura has appeared across 11 novels to date. Sujata Massey is also the pen behind the popular Perveen Mistry series. Modeled on the historic Parsi attorney who practiced law in the 1920s, Mistry is the first female lawyer in cosmopolitan Mumbai, and one of the first ever in India. The Mistress of Bhatia House in 2023, the fourth and latest installment, garnered Massey her third Agatha Award.
Hello, Plymouth. It's so exciting to be here. I don't know how many people are aware that I grew up in the Twin Cities suburbs. Yes, I see a lot of nodding heads. I was actually growing up in Falcon Heights, or we should say Falcon Heights, in the 1970s and 80s. And I had two libraries that I went to. One was this beautiful little Carnegie Library in St. Anthony Park that I could walk to. And the other one was the Ramsey County Library, where the librarian let me read books that were beyond the children's section. Because sometimes they try to keep you in the children's section, and sometimes they let you go wild and read what you want to read. So those libraries were very important to me growing up. And I also lived in the Twin Cities between 2006 and 2012. I came back as an adult, already established as a mystery author, and my husband was working in Eden Prairie, and we were living in Minneapolis then. And that was a very transitional period for me in my career. You had heard that I'd written this earlier mystery series that is about a Japanese-American character. It's set in Tokyo, and I had lived for a while in Japan. And that series had sort of come to an abrupt end, and I wanted to do something else. And I was casting about for what I wanted to do. And I had had this feeling for a long time that I wanted to start writing about India, but I didn't exactly know how. You see, I'm one of those people that sometimes they call them a third culture person, that they have many different national backgrounds. My father's from India. My mom, who's here tonight, is from Germany. I was born in England, and we went to the United States when I was 5. So with all that, like, how do you decide what you want to write about? What do you know best, and what do you want to know more about? And one of the things that the Twin Cities has, University of Minnesota, the University of Minnesota gave me a chance to take as an adult student to come in and take a Hindi class that ran, Monday through Friday, an undergraduate course, and I could just take it. I guess you would call it auditing the course, though I took tests and stuff like that. And also, the University of Minnesota has some amazing libraries within libraries. And there's a library called the Ames Library of South Asia that is in the main Wilson building, but it's down in the basement. And the story of the Ames Library was back in the 1920s, there was a St. Paul businessman who went on an international cruise, and he met some British people who lived in India, and they were part of that British colonial system in India. He became fascinated with it. He wanted to learn more about it, even though he was, this guy from St. Paul, that profitable lifestyle, and was never going to go to India. He didn't plan to go to India, but he was interested. So he started collecting books about India that were published then, that were published earlier, all kinds of materials. And he had this private library that he bequeathed the collection at the time of his death. I think it was 25,000 books. But later on, it was more like, 250,000 books. I can't remember the exact number that is at the Ames Library, because once you start to have a growth of a collection, more people will bring you books. And there was a period that the US State Department collected every book that was published in India and Pakistan, and they sent one to the Library of Congress and the other one to the Ames Library. So you can imagine how that collection grew and how that gave me the fodder. Like I was able to look at government records, I was able to look at memoirs, and so I would like to say that the birth of my writing in India actually happened in the Twin Cities. And I'm sure I wouldn't have done it if I hadn't had those 6 years here. And of course, with my parents around, I was able to lean into spending time with my father, and I have a stepfather and a stepmom that also are from India. So I was able to learn a lot about their family experiences and also get tips for when I travel to India to do my research, where to go, what to think about, what to learn. And that was a really, really great privilege to have that. So my first approach was basically to learn, if you're going to, this is like, okay, let's say do it yourself. You want to write a historical mystery series set in another country. My first approach was to really learn how, decide the time I wanted to write about. And before this Perveen Mistry series, which starts with The Widows of Malabar Hill, and the most recent is Mistress of Bhatia House, there was a book called The Sleeping Dictionary that I wrote, that I see some heads nodding. I really loved writing that book. It was never the commercial success that these mysteries are, but it really is a book of my heart, and that is a book that pulls in what I was interested in learning about, which was that there was this alternate freedom movement in India where they were trying to get independence. It wasn't just this quiet resistance. There were ideas about doing it more actively. And there were women involved in both movements, both the movement of Gandhi and also the movement of Subhas Chandra Bose. So I was really interested in that, and I was able to get things at the Ames Library, of course, and I wrote about that, and I began to learn that there were all these women during the 1920s and even earlier in India that were teachers, they were principals, there were even a few doctors and a couple of lawyers. And in fact, it turned out the first woman lawyer in the whole India, the British colonial empire, and that includes Britain as well as India and all the other countries, was an Indian woman from near Bombay, now Mumbai. So that woman, Cornelia Sarabji, and the second woman lawyer in India, Mitantata Lam, they both had a couple things in common. And when you're going to write, if you're especially going to write a historical character, you don't want to make that person a unicorn. You want to look for what was going on at that time. What are the factors that would make the woman likely to wind up in her place? And one of them was being connected to a minority religion. With the Parsis, as the Zoroastrians are called in India. I see a Parsi in the audience, and don't tell me how I know, but there always is one. So just to give, I mean, I give a really good super duper explanation, not being a Parsi, but from my understanding, the Parsis began arriving in India as refugees from Persia starting around 700 AD, and there was this trickle of people looking for religious freedom, and they were able to live in India. I've heard that a couple of the requirements for them were they were not supposed to, they were forbidden to convert people to their religion, and women were supposed to wear saris. That was another thing, and there was something, I think that they were supposed to have their special events in the evening, is that right? I think that they couldn't have festivals in the daytime. They wanted them doing these things sort of where it's not as quite observed. So they wound up staying in India, and a lot of them were invited by the British to help build the city of Bombay when the British got control of that area. It was a gift to them from the Portuguese government. So I knew that these lawyers were coming from that community. Cornelia Sarabji, the first one I mentioned, her father was a Parsi. They actually did change over to Christianity, but she always dressed as a Parsi and felt she was part of that community. And then the second one was, through and through a Parsi. So I wanted to make my character a Parsi to honor that community and what they had done, that they had allowed their women to work in the professions, including law, before other groups in India were comfortable doing it. A lot of people thought it was socially risky for your daughter to be in a workplace around men. So another community that also was an unusual minority community that figures in this book, The Mistress of Bhatia House, is the Jewish community. And there are multiple Jewish communities in India. There are Jewish people in Kerala. They are in Bombay. There were two separate groups. There were ones that came from Iraq, and then there were ones that came much earlier from the Middle East, and they were shipwrecked in the area. And that particular group wound up dressing much more in an Indian way. They intermarried in the beginning, so they're much browner. They spoke the Marathi language. And there's a character in my book, The Mistress of Bhatia House, a OBGYN, Dr. Miriam Penker, and she is inspired by India's first Indian woman OBGYN, who was a Jewish woman living in Bombay. And I learned about her. I was lucky enough to meet a Jewish Indian historian in Bombay and in Mumbai, and so she helped me a lot with the research for that book. It really takes a team to be able to do these things. And when you think about it, writing the Perveen Mistry series are a bunch of legal mysteries set 100 years ago with a legal system that no longer exists. Can you believe it that there is a scholar at the University of Wisconsin, her name is Dr. Mitra Sharafi, and she wrote a book all about the importance of the Parsis in Bombay's legal system. And her book it's a scholarly book, but it was full of all these stories about crazy cases that these lawyers had and how they worked with other people and how they brought women in and the kinds of things that they litigated. And so I read her book and I wrote her a letter asking her a question. Hypothetically, do you think Perveen Mistry would, my character Perveen, what would she have done in this inheritance case? And she wrote back to me, and ever since then, she's been reading my work before it's published and helping me navigate certain things. There are all different kinds of courtroom situations in my books, and including coroner's court, which if you've watched a lot of crime TV, you may have seen these scenes where there's a coroner's court, and they used to have these situations where if there was a suspicious death, there was an investigation, but a jury had to agree with the coroner's argument about how the person died. And you can imagine this is especially intense if it's a colonial situation where there are police who may have committed violence, lethal violence. And the coroner's court was the place where the doctors would try to get the police off, from being charged with murder. And so I get to work on those kinds of things in my books, which I really enjoy. I mean, it is a lot of fun to write these books. What else did I want to tell you? So the Mistress of Bhatia House, I want to talk about this book directly. It's the fourth book in the Perveen Mistry series. The series is ongoing. You do not have to have read the earlier books to enjoy this book because you will meet Perveen. She's a 24-year-old woman lawyer with sort of an unusual romantic predicament that she had a failed first marriage and she can't quite free herself from it because the laws were such that you couldn't divorce very easily, not even for cases of abuse and infidelity in that day. So she lives with her family as a separated woman, and she works with her father at the family law firm. And I had been thinking that I wanted to write a mystery that dealt with reproductive health issues of the 1920s. I know that sounds kind of intense and scholarly, but it's really interesting when you think about it that this was a time that in the West, people were trying to develop birth control. For example, in Europe, in the Netherlands, they had invented something called the Dutch cap, which later, other people called the diaphragm, but in the beginning they just called it the Dutch cap, and they were creating spermicides and, or whatever, trying to do these things. And in the United States, Margaret Sanger was advocating for legalized birth control, and she was pointing out how hard it was for poor women that just had child after child after child, and that the more children they had, the poorer their family stayed, and that they would be unable to, make their lives better. So this kind of feeling was going on, and in India, the doctors were seeing, when girls were getting married at age 10, and they were having a baby quite young, that it was especially dangerous for them because their bones were soft and they were more likely to have complications. And having child after child, it wasn't uncommon for somebody to have 10 or 13 pregnancies. Many of the times the women died. There are many situations where a man was married 3 times because these wives have died in childbirth, and they would marry again, and you kind of forget about the earlier moms sometimes. So there were a lot of reasons that people cared about women being able to live, babies being able to thrive. And so in this book, Perveen is invited to a fundraising tea party for a women's maternity hospital. And it's a group of Gujarati ladies. Do we have any Gujaratis here today? Yeah, okay. So I'm going to make an assumption that you may know. Um, Gujaratis are a very successful business community. And in Bombay, they settled in, a lot of them that came from Gujarat, like they would walk 10 days to get to the city. They would start off in the heart of the city, and they would be running to and fro, carrying heavy things. And they're really share business knowledge with each other. And a lot of them became successful business people. And then they moved out to this suburb, like the Plymouth of Bombay is this neighborhood Ghatkopar, which was this beautiful little village. My stepdad can tell you how lovely it was when he was a child, and that there were really cows around there and everything. And then it became this place that once you made your money, you would live there, you would buy a big house. And so Perveen goes out to that suburb, but she meets a lot of these ladies, and they're fundraising to build a women's maternity hospital that's in the heart of the old, this hustle bustle area where a lot of people are very poor. And that maternity hospital, that whole idea came to me. My dad is remarried to a woman from Gujarat, and her mother was involved in this Gujarati women's community that was building a hospital in the slum, and they started doing that in the 1960s. But people were doing this stuff in the 20s. They were trying, and often it was the women who noticed this inequity that that so many people were dying, and that it's a subject nobody wants to talk about. They wanted to help. So Perveen gets involved in this tea party, but it gets a whole lot more complicated when one of the women at the party, one of the servants, gets accused of a crime that goes against the code of the legal codes of the time. Like there were laws against sharing information about birth control, laws against sending, or giving birth control to people. There were laws against abortion, but interestingly, the laws were only enforced on not the woman who had the abortion, but anybody that was believed to have coerced her into it or provided materials if she died. So it's actually a very different, it's like a more liberal situation than we have today in many parts of the United States. So all of that was really interesting. Unfortunately, my friend at the University of Wisconsin, Dr. Mitra Sharafi, had written a 40-page essay on the history of reproductive medicine, and I was able to learn a lot from that when I was writing my book. So there's some fairly intense situations in this book, and some of the other real life things that I don't know if or recognize them. I like to write a lot about Perveen's family because it's an extended household. And she has this sister-in-law, Gulnaz. And in this book, Gulnaz has just had a baby that is very, very welcome. Her behavior in this book is a little bit strange. Gulnaz's behavior is strange. Do you think they know what postpartum depression is in 1921? No, they didn't know what it was. They had absolutely zero mental health care, especially for women. There were asylums, but there were places for like British soldiers. There was just terrible amount of health care. And this situation was also inspired by something in real life. Has anybody ever heard of Muhammad Ali Jinnah? He was the founder of Pakistan, the first president. So at the time of my books, he was a high-powered barrister in Bombay. So he was just super flashy. He was like, I'm trying to think of who some of those lawyers were in, like Johnny Cochrane in the OJ trial. He was like that kind of character. You'd bring him in. So he married, it was sort of this crazy love marriage that everyone was mad about. He married this young Parsi girl who was in love with him. Her name was Reti, and she came from a very aristocratic Parsi family. After Reti had her first baby with Muhammad Ali Jinnah, she walked out. She just walked out. And everyone thought it was crazy, and she lived in the hotel by herself. She traveled in Europe with her mother. She never saw her child again. She was raised by the daughter was raised by Muhammad Ali Jinnah. So I always thought that was a really intriguing situation. I look for these things. I don't know about you, but it's like real life, like who has to be creative really when you just think about bringing in things from real life? Like, my books are not that serious. I mean, you're probably hearing these sound like serious issues, but there's some fun in them too. One of the characters I really had fun with is a woman from Australia called Princess Cora. And the reason, she's a redheaded woman who was kind of a performer, let's say. She was a showgirl in Australia. And what happened in those days is half of India was not British India. Half of India was little states that were ruled by Maharajas that were really, they were kind of controlled by the British, but they actually had the wealth of those states. And a lot of these, and they couldn't be called kings anymore. They could only be called princes. And so a lot of these princes had tons of money, and they drank a lot, they traveled internationally, and quite a few of them had Western women as girlfriends and even brought some of them back as wives. And so I had a book about all these kind of women and what happened, the sad things that happened to them when they came to India, and they found that instead of having this luxurious life, they might be one of 5 or more wives. The British government would not recognize them because there was all this strict stuff about who the heir to the throne is, and having this British person in it complicates things so that they wouldn't have a nice expat life that they were expecting. So I had fun with that character. I think that these books are, they're a reflection of things I'm interested in, and they also are a way to bring you another world. I think when I was young, I remember probably 3rd grade, all I wanted to do was read about ancient Greece. And when I got into that Greek mythology, I just loved it. And I found it so refreshing to leave Minnesota and read about these foreign places. And I'm happy to say that I feel that a lot when I talk to people around the country about the series. And I think that we can have entertainment, and we can open our eyes. And I'm just so grateful to have been doing this for, I guess I started my fiction in 1997 was my first book. So it's been quite a long time, and I really have to thank library readers for keeping me on the shelves. And also, I feel like we really need to stand up for our libraries, because a lot of times now people don't want librarians to have the chance to decide what to add to their collections. And so we need to have the libraries back so that we can keep having these adventures like I did as a child, and that we can keep reading about people from all over the world.
With that, we have reached the part of our podcast where we turn to our club book audience for questions and comments for Sujata Massey and her work. In this book club, we like to encourage members and authors to connect and engage and help bridge the gap between the page you read and the process it took to write it. Our first question of the night comes from an audience member wondering about the fate of Perveen's husband Cyrus in The Widows of Malabar Hill.
If you read it carefully, he gets on a train, but I don't want to talk too much about it. Well, the reason I had him get on a train is I want to bring him back. I want to bring him back in another book. So, I've learned, one of the things I learned writing an earlier mystery series is you don't want to close doors, and you also want to give your heroine a lot of freedom. Like, it's easier for me to write about an unmarried heroine, because imagine in the 1920s, you get married, your husband's, people are going to talk down to your husband if he allows you to go around and, work. And in fact, the second woman lawyer, Mitan Tata Lam, her husband was also a lawyer, and she really stopped practicing law after she married. And she did some other really great things. She sort of became an advocate for women's rights and Indian independence, but she couldn't exactly do the same thing as her husband. So that's one of the reasons that I played around with Cyrus like that.
This audience member asked about Sujata Massey's writing process.
I would say that for a long time, for maybe my first 10 books, I was the pantser. And the pantser is a person that just sits, like they're wearing pants, and they sit in a chair, and they just kind of like, they see what happens as they go along, and they let their brain kind of creatively lead them. And I found that when I did that, especially with the book, The Sleeping Dictionary, which if you read that, that's my longest book. That book is over 400 pages. And the drafts of it were like 600, 700, maybe even 700 pages, one of them in the beginning. And I just couldn't resist telling stories. I couldn't resist sending my character into the mountains, or it was just really hard. And it was too much, and I had to rein it in order to sell that book. And then I realized it was just hard. But the good thing about having had that big experience with that long pantsing episode for India is I had created this file system of information. I never, I'm laughing, I rarely throw away information because I might use it again, and that's not like the best housekeeping style, but I really do. I do have a lot of manila folders, and so I had a folder, I have things like, I've got a folder on women lawyers, I have a folder on who were the women doctors, I have a folder on 1920s restaurants in such and such a city. So when I decided to write the Perveen Mistry books, which are, they're mystery novels and they're historical, and each one is going to tell a personal story about Perveen and her family, and maybe a boyfriend, maybe a husband, and they're going to tell a story that's something about an event that was really happening in India, such as the Prince of Wales was visiting Bombay, or there was a problem in the countryside with these royal households where the children needed to be educated, and a lot of people had different ideas about it, and there were murders of those in those families. So I would have an idea like that, and I found, okay, I'm going to write a little outline of what I want to do. So that's the start of being a plotter, and even to the point that I know I write a 32 chapter book. I write a book that is 110,000 words, and that is after revision. Like I will, by the first time I turn it in, it's 90,000 words. And then of course the editor has all these ideas like, you didn't explore this, or you need to cut that, or then I have a great idea. And so it always winds up being 110,000 words. So that's the length of a Perveen Mistry book. And so it's 32 chapters. So sometimes I do index cards, like 32 index cards, and I have my ideas and I put them near that. I've become much more of a graphic display of information person. So those are some of the things that I do. And at the same time, when I'm sitting down and working on that book, a lot of the surprises that come to me are the things about Perveen's family and relationships. Because when people are having a conversation, you say, nah, they wouldn't say that, or, oh, I bet that Perveen's father wouldn't let her do that, and she'd have to think about another way to get that information. So those parts are a little bit more spontaneous than sort of the parts of, like, I know I want to write a mystery about reproductive rights. I know somebody's got to go be jailed. I know Perveen's going to try to get them out of jail. I know, I will know a variety of beats, as they say. So it's like a combination, but I would say it is more toward plotting now.
This question is about how Sujata Massey went about getting published.
What I did was I looked for books that were similar in tone and weight to the kind of book I was writing. Like, for example, there is a really great writer, S.J. Roseanne, who was writing about a Chinese American woman detective in Chinatown. And honestly, that was the first Asian woman mystery protagonist I had ever seen. Like, when I was looking at this stuff in the early 90s, I mean, there were people that had to write white characters. I mean, that they could not sell a book with an Asian character. So I thought, well, I'm going to write to that agent. And then I looked at a book that I liked, that it was set in the world of Italy. And it was a really charming series that had just a warmth to it, a little bit of romance. And so that author, the way I found the agents is these authors, they all thank their agents. So you might have to do some deduction when you're reading the acknowledgments, but they all thank their agents. So and now I understand it's like you send them emails, and they also usually have information on what they want to see. Like, they might want to see a couple of pages, but most people don't ever want to open attachments, because there's some really nasty stuff in attachments. So a lot of times people might ask you to paste. But also it's really great to go to conferences where you are meeting other writers and editors and agents. I did that too. And I entered a contest called the Malice Domestic Unpublished Writers Grant Contest, and I won that contest. And then I had a credential.
Our next question is if Sujata Massey started writing at a young age.
Oh boy, did I ever. And I was so angry, because this is what you don't do. Like, if you have a little child that writes poems, don't read your child's poems to other adults when they come to dinner. Because that is something that happened in my house. Because then that child is embarrassed. Like, you're proud of your child, but then their child is embarrassed. I like to draw. I love doll houses. To this day, I love doll houses. And I feel like I love paper dolls. So all of those things combine in my books. If you look at the way I write about furniture and clothing, as well as the serious stuff, so I think that it's really wonderful. It's wonderful to shower books on your kids and tell them, yeah, you can write poetry. And in the end, you know what happened? I did come back to writing. So it didn't spoil it. But I said for many years, I didn't want to be a writer. I went to college to study international relations because I wanted to live abroad. And now what my life is, I combine the two things. I write books that are set abroad, and I get to travel abroad.
This Club Book audience member wonders if any of Massey's work is going to be adapted for the big screen.
Something's in the works. But it's like these things, they take years and years and years. So I can't really say that much about it until it's like a little bit more official. But I'm the person, I can't really say, but it's like a very nice match. It's like it's like I feel like the person who's in charge of the company is like my brother. He was like, oh, I know all the Parsis. All my friends are Parsis. I live in Malabar Hill. It's like that kind of a thing where the person lives in the world that I write about, and that makes me feel more convinced that it will be good.
Our next question is what software Massey likes to use for writing.
Sometimes I just look at my laptop and say, I just wish you would write for me today. And that's what artificial intelligence is all about. And you know what really ticks me off is that my books were taken without my permission to train artificial intelligence. And it's just like really creepy. Though I suppose I could take advantage of it on a dull day. So I started out using Word and doing these really long documents. And in the old days, you actually would have to print it out and send it to your editor in a box. And then they would mark it and send it back to you. And then you would go back to your computer. You would do all these things. And then you would send a floppy disk. Remember those floppy disks in the 1990s? So I always thought, the good thing about Word, though, is you can run through and do these spell checks. You can do these auto replaces of character names. You can move things very, very safely. So that makes it really good. Now, I thought there had to be something better out because I was seeing all these people on YouTube talking about a system called Scrivener. Does anybody know about Scrivener? Oh yes, there's some writers in this group. So Scrivener is a system where you can write your story, but it has all these areas that you can save things, like you can save character names, you can write a chapter, file it, pull it up, and I did that with the first Perveen book, and I thought it would, I thought it was okay, but now I feel like having a lot of things to look at is distracting. Like the way my brain works, it's just like a little better to do it all just on a simple Word document. If I need to know the character's name, like it should be like on a piece of paper on my desk, and I can look at it if I forgot that. And I talk about this, and it's totally serious that I will forget a character's name. I won't forget Perveen's name, but I might forget her grandfather's name. That kind of thing. So that's what I do. I'm back to using Word, and it hasn't crashed. In the past, it sometimes crashed when in the track changes. And editors really, they insist on that. They insist on the Word.
This fan inquires about the release date of Sujata Massey's next book.
Okay, I know it's been a while. I apologize for the length of the editing process, but the last I heard is early March 2026. But that's a year. But they have to, so it's still at my house. I'm doing edits. I'm doing a third round of edits on it. There have been some interesting developments. There's a double twist ending, and when you do a double twist ending and you upend everything, you have to be very careful that you cross your T's and dot your I's, and all the ends are tied up. So that's the date for that, and it's a mystery that is set in the world of silent film. In the 1920s, just like all over the world, people were enjoying the movies, and there were some very interesting types of movies out there, like the Charlie Chaplin movies, and there were movies with these damsels in distress, and there were movies with gangsters, and there was just like the whole spectrum. And they were making movies in different countries, including India. So I'm writing about that world. Perveen gets involved in that.
Another audience member wonders about Massey's writing schedule.
Well, everybody's biology is different, and there definitely are night owls, but I'm not a night owl. I'm a morning person, and the very best work I do is like within an hour of awakening. And if I work in the morning, I will get twice as much done than if I tried to do it later. Another thing, and this actually works, like this is all science. If you exercise before you write, like not wipe yourself out, but like say you jump on your trampoline for 10 minutes or you take a 30-minute walk, like you will be more creative. So I lean into every hack that I can, including that little bit of exercise first thing in the morning, caffeine. So I recently had the honor of interviewing Alexander McCall Smith when he was in Washington, D.C. And we had some time in the green room together, and he has really big problems with insomnia, he said, and sometimes he wakes up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and he said it with his wonderful accent. It's the hour of the wolf, and everything feels negative, but we need to get up then. That's the time that you can write. And so he said, and so I'll write then, and then I'll be done. He said he never writes in the afternoon, that he doesn't feel like writing in the afternoon. It's like, I don't really feel like writing in the afternoon either. I'm just going to follow his advice.
This question asker wonders why the Rei Shimura series ended.
So the first thing that happened is after my 9th book, HarperCollins didn't want to continue that series, and I wanted to continue it. I wrote a 10th book, and my intent for that was to make that it ties up the series. And so Rei has a wonderful romantic resolution in that book, and it sort of like there literally is a sunset, in that book, a Hawaiian sunset. And I thought, okay, I'm done with that. I did write one more, which was set after the tsunami in Japan, and I just felt like I just wanted to be there, and I felt very, very sad. And so I wrote a book where Perveen gets involved in that. But I realized that as I was doing that my own intellectual interest was turning much more to India. And I think it's important to follow what you want to do with writing. Like, for example, after this next book, this Perveen book, I want to write a book of Perveen short stories. I think I'm going to grow as a writer. If you know how I tell you I write so long. If I can do a bunch of things shorter, I think I'm going to grow as a writer, and I'll also be able to have more adventures for her. And I'll write a novel after that, but I just think that when we have that chance to try novel things, usually it's a good result. And if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out, but at least I'm intrigued.
Our last question of the night comes from an audience member wondering who Massey would like to see play Perveen in a movie adaptation of her work.
I've had it suggested to me Alia Bhatt, but she's kind of small and kind of has that look. I really am open. I'm open if it was somebody that was a brand new actress making a debut. I'm open to somebody that's maybe a little older than 24. There are some real powerhouse actors in India who are in their 30s. Of course, they don't look like they're in their 30s, in my opinion, but they are in their 30s, and I could be quite flexible. I'm not the person that makes the end decision. It's the person has to be tempted to want to do that role. So we'll see what happens. Yeah, we'll see what happens. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Club Book.
That wraps up our Hennepin County Library event with Sujata Massey. Make sure to catch our next podcast with Alifair Burke. Fans and critics alike credit Alifair Burke with some of the most believable psychological thrillers and police procedurals in modern fiction. Her growing backlist includes popular series featuring Detective Ellie Hatcher and DA Samantha Kincaid. Burke's latest, The Note, is a standalone psychological thriller. Visit us online at clubbook.org for details on past and present seasons, sign up for our e-newsletter, check out our calendar, and so much more. Stay up to date with all of our events at our Club Book Facebook page. If you're on Twitter, find us using the handle ClubBookMN. And if you enjoy these free Club Book events and podcasts, remember to share them with your friends. They just may too. Thanks again to all those who make Club Book possible, including Melsa, Library Strategies, and Minnesota's Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. Our sponsors include Red Balloon Bookshop, where you can purchase all the books featured in Club Book. Finally, a very special thank you to all the libraries hosting events this season. That's it for Club Book, the coolest club in town. We'll see you at the library.